Margaret in Merseyside. Margaret, you're on their side.
Yes, I am.
Tell me why. What you feel
I think
about
they're very unfairly treated. I mean, you've got the royal family banging on about how they're marvellous treating people with mental health issues.
Yeah.
And Meghan and Harry have both admitted they have mental health issues, and they throw them under the bus.
But how do you think they were thrown under the bus when it was Meghan and Harry who decided to leave and to make the break?
They had no alternative. They had no choice. They were getting treated so badly.
So you really feel for them. So when you see them touring, you think, well, good for you, and you know.
I do, yes.
Yeah.
And they've got to make money somehow.
Right.
And no one else is going to give it them like the rest of them get.
Okay, so you're absolutely with them. We're certainly not getting much criticism for them. If we're taking the temperature here, people are well behind them. It's interesting,
let's
isn't
not
it?
forget, it was the British media that drove them to the point of wanting to leave. When you just look at a montage of, there are a couple of specific papers, but when you look at a montage of their front pages, they were pretty much on those front pages 3 days a week, and it was remorselessly negative.
I know that Daisy's going to say that's not the case and that the media was very much behind them at the beginning. At the beginning,
they definitely were. But if you read Harry's book and if you hear what they say, their perception was 100% what David is saying. They perceived that they were being attacked.
Well, I bought the papers and I read it, and my perception was exactly the same. It was there in print.
Something unexpected happened live on air, and you could feel the shift. Not subtle, not gradual, immediate. The kind of moment where a carefully controlled narrative just slips. And suddenly the people who are supposed to be guiding the conversation, they're the ones scrambling to catch up. That's exactly what went down during that exchange, because what was meant to be a routine discussion about Meghan Markle and Prince Harry turned into something very different. It turned into the public breaking the script. Let's talk about Margaret, because she wasn't prepped, she wasn't filtered, she wasn't trying to fit into a media-friendly narrative. She just said what a lot of people have been thinking for a long time. They were treated unfairly. And you could almost feel the tension in the room the moment she said it, because that's not the answer they were expecting. They expected hesitation. They expected balance. They expected someone to say, well, both sides. But no, Margaret came in direct and, more importantly, confident. And here's where things start to unravel for the panel. Because instead of acknowledging her perspective, what do? They try to steer her back. Are you sure? But they chose to leave. Was it really that bad? You can hear it, that subtle push, that attempt to guide the narrative back into familiar territory. But Margaret doesn't budge. She doubles down, and that's when it becomes clear. This isn't going the way they planned. Because here's the truth the media struggles with. You can control headlines, you can shape narratives, but you can't fully control how people feel once they've seen enough. And Margaret? She's seen enough. She points out the contradiction that no one on that panel could comfortably answer. How can the royal family promote mental health awareness while completely failing to support their own when they needed it most? That's not a small question. That's a fundamental one. And notice how quickly the conversation tries to move past it. Now, let's bring in the media angle, because this is where the panel really starts losing ground. When it's pointed out that Meghan and Harry were on front pages constantly and not in a balanced way, the response is predictable. Well, the media supported them at the beginning. Ah, yes, the beginning. That short, convenient window everyone loves to reference. But here's what they don't want to sit with. What matters isn't how it started. It's how it ended, and more importantly, why it changed. Because that shift, it wasn't random, it was sharp, deliberate. And if you were actually paying attention, like Margaret clearly was, you saw it happening in real time. She even says it herself. I bought the papers. My perception was exactly the same. That right there is the moment the panel loses control. Because now it's no longer about what Meghan and Harry claimed. It's about what the public actually experienced. And those two things, they're lining up perfectly. Let's talk about Spare for a second, because the panel tries to downplay it as just their perception. But here's the problem with that argument. When thousands, if not millions of people share that same perception, it stops being just a personal interpretation. It becomes a pattern. Harry didn't just tell his story. He confirmed what people were already starting to suspect, that behind the polished image of the institution, there was a complete failure to protect. And I want to zero in on something else that came out of that exchange. This idea that Meghan and Harry had a choice, because that's the line that keeps getting repeated. They chose to leave. But Margaret flips that narrative without even trying. She says they had no alternative. And suddenly everything changes. Because now we're not talking about privilege. We're talking about pressure. We're not talking about rebellion. We're talking about survival. And here's where I'm going to say what the panel clearly didn't want to admit. If staying means constant attack, if staying means your mental health deteriorates, if staying means your voice is silenced, then leaving isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. And deep down, people understand that. That's why Margaret's response hit the way it did, because it wasn't rehearsed, it was real. Now let's get into the money argument, because of course that gets brought up. They have to make money somehow. And you can almost hear the undertone, the implication, like somehow earning independently is something to be questioned. But think about how ridiculous that is. The same institution that critics defend is funded by public money. Yet two individuals choosing to build their own income stream? That's the problem? No. Let's call it what it is. Control. They were supposed to stay within the system, play by its rules, depend on its structure. But instead, they stepped outside of it. And that's what really unsettles people. And this is the part where the panel completely loses the room. Because instead of challenging Margaret effectively, they start reacting. They start repeating talking points. They start trying to regain control of a narrative that's already slipping. But it's too late. The audience has already heard something more powerful than any headline, an unscripted moment of clarity. And those moments, they matter, because they show that the narrative isn't as solid as it once seemed. They show that public opinion isn't as easily shaped as it used to be. And most importantly, they show that people are starting to question what they've been told. So when you see clips like this going viral, when you see everyday people speaking up, when you see support for Meghan and Harry coming from places that weren't expected, that's not accidental. That's a shift, a real one. Because at the end of the day, this was supposed to be just another segment, another controlled conversation, another opportunity to reinforce the same tired narrative. But instead, it became something else entirely. It became a moment where the public said, "No, we're not going along with this anymore." And once that happens, once people start thinking for themselves, once they start connecting the dots, you can't put that back in the box. Now, I really want to hear your thoughts on this, because moments like this don't just happen for no reason. Do you think the UK public is finally starting to see through the media narrative around Meghan and Harry? Or was this just one isolated moment? Why do you think the panel struggled so much to push back against Margaret's points? And do you believe more people are quietly supporting them than we're being led to believe? Drop your opinions in the comments. I'm always in there reading and replying. And if you want more breakdowns like this, where we go beyond the headlines and really unpack what's going on, make sure you subscribe to Spotlight Daily and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one.